With only 20 minutes until a nuclear missile was set to strike the United States, a House of Dynamite explored what might happen if an ICBM was mid-flight over the northwestern Pacific Ocean, headed straight for the Chicago metropolitan area, a hit that would bring massive destruction and loss of life. The film offered multiple perspectives on how different parts of the national security system would react in such a crisis. A House of Dynamite had a lot to say, and its abrupt ending was clearly intentional. It left the audience questioning what they had just watched, forcing them to imagine the outcome themselves. But before we look at what the ending was really about, I have to remind you that while the movie shows the United States as the victim of a nuclear threat, history reminds us that the U.S. is still the only country to ever use nuclear weapons against human beings. In August 1945, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed, and over 200,000 people, mostly civilians, lost their lives. That event changed the course of history and marked the beginning of the nuclear age. So, when movies frame the U.S. as the target and other nations as the villains, it's worth remembering that some of those countries don't even possess nuclear weapons. The real country the world should be most cautious of, when it comes to nuclear power and its possible use, is the very one that has already done it once, the United States. Now let's get into it, and this video will contain spoilers, so here's your warning. The ending of A House of Dynamite came as a real surprise. The entire film, built around a 20-minute countdown, naturally set the expectation of a clear resolution. But instead, it denied us one. There was no closure, no answer, just the cut to black. That frustration was deliberate. The filmmakers wanted to leave viewers suspended in that moment of uncertainty, mirroring the helplessness and chaos the characters themselves were feeling. The final perspective in A House of Dynamite centered on the President of the United States, the one person everyone expected to have an answer. Yet, as the missile drew closer to Chicago, it became clear that even he didn't know what to do. No one on the call did. The source of the attack was unknown, untraceable, and every attempt to intercept the missile through the DSB satellites had failed. In this situation, the film highlights two sharply different responses to the crisis. General Anthony Brady, the senior military officer at U.S. Strategic Command, urges the president to strike back immediately, an all-out offensive against every possible nuclear threat. In contrast, Deputy National Security Advisor Jake Barrington argues for restraint, insisting that doing nothing might prevent global annihilation. But Reed Baker shifts his priority to reaching his daughter in Chicago, rather than shaping policy, and the president is left to make the ultimate decision that could either save or end millions of lives. He could let the missile strike, sacrificing countless lives, or retaliate without knowing who was responsible, still losing lives, but showing strength to the world. Either way, people were going to die. The question was whether those lives would only be American, or if innocent people somewhere else would also pay the price for that decision. But then, what's the point of showing strength when it's suicide? Who exactly do you want to scare if the world itself will be gone? A full-scale nuclear exchange wouldn't prove power, it would erase it. It would likely spark World War III, and humanity could end up sharing the same fate as the dinosaurs. That's the haunting logic buried beneath the House of Dynamite, the idea that once the first button is pressed, no one truly wins. The title of this movie served as a metaphor for the fragile world we live in, a world built on weapons, secrets, and tension, where everything could explode at any moment, yet life goes on as if it's stable. The film used that idea to make a point. Humanity is sitting inside its own house of dynamite, pretending the walls aren't ready to blow. That theme connected back to the small details, like Olivia Walker's son's toy dinosaur, shown at the beginning and again near the end, symbolizing extinction. It reminded us that just like the meteorite that wiped out the dinosaurs, our own actions could bring about a similar end. The closing scenes also tied back to the movie's title in another way. Despite all the protocols, plans, and systems supposedly designed to prevent disaster, no one truly knew what to do when it mattered most. Every department had its own strategy, some diplomatic, others militaristic, but none offered real leadership. The so-called centers of power were divided, paralyzed, and uncertain, showing that when it comes down to it, even the people in charge are just as lost as everyone else. The president's uncertainty became even more apparent when he turned to his wife for advice. Despite her having no role in the decision-making or even an idea of how things like that are done. That moment captured the chaos and helplessness of the situation. Video calls filled with shouting, people running back and forth, and the grim awareness that millions of lives were at stake. It reflected how confusion and fear would likely take over in a real crisis like this, and those in charge would have to suppress their emotions just to function. Lives were going to be lost, and no one had the power to stop it. Throughout those tense scenes, the film reminded us that even in positions of authority, people remain human. Beringer mentioned his wife being 6 months pregnant. The president called his own wife for comfort, and Reed Baker spoke with his daughter in Chicago, knowing she will not survive. Each of these moments showed how personal attachments and love continued to linger in their minds, even as they tried to think like professionals. The tragedy was that in order to do their jobs, they had to almost shut off that part of themselves. Reed Baker's final act of walking off the roof carried heavy emotional weight. After speaking with his daughter and realizing she was with someone she cared about, he found a small sense of peace. Knowing she wouldn't die alone seemed to give him closure, even as he faced unbearable pain. From his conversation, it was clear his wife had already passed away, and with his daughter's death imminent, now he has nothing to live for. The film tied these deeply personal moments back to its larger message, and its title, A House of Dynamite. It reminded us that events like this could happen without the world even knowing. The 20-minute countdown gave viewers glimpses of ordinary people living their daily lives, walking, laughing, waiting in line, completely unaware of the threat racing toward them. Just like the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, who were living normal lives with no idea of what was to come, these moments served as a chilling reminder of how quickly everything can change. That contrast made history even more haunting. When the movie cut to black at the end, it felt like the perspective was passed to us, the audience. We were left to decide how the story truly ended. Did the president order a counterattack? Or did he let the missile strike the United States without responding? Either way, it was a lose-lose situation. But from the way that scene was set up, with the folder already open and the tension hanging in the air, it seemed more likely that he launched the strike. Not because he was sure who attacked, but because doing nothing would be seen as weakness. The choice to end the film this way wasn't random. The black screen wasn't just the end, it was a pause, one that forced the audience to sit with the message. The idea that this could easily be our world. That all it takes is one mistake, one false assumption, for everything we know to collapse. And just like the citizens in the movie, most of us would have no idea it was even happening. Because whether we accept it or not, we're all living in a house of dynamite. Another major focus in the movie was the reenactment of the Battle of Gettysburg. That battle between the Union and Confederate armies during the Civil War remains the deadliest in American history, with over 50,000 soldiers losing their lives. Its inclusion wasn't just historical, it was symbolic. It reminded us that the way wars are fought has changed completely. The number of lives that could now be lost isn't in the thousands anymore. It is in millions. Just like what was projected to happen when the missile was heading for Chicago. One of the interesting cliffhangers was Reed Baker's story. Hearing a background sound on the earlier call, and then later realizing it was him walking off the roof, was subtle but powerful. It rewarded the audience for paying attention, and moments like that kept the movie engaging all the way through. Ending with the president's point of view was the right call. It gave the story a natural closing point while leaving the big question open.